So, good morning, everybody. Thank you, first of all, that you decided to come to our session. I would like briefly to introduce ourselves and the panelists before entering into the discussion. It's a bit later than foreseen, so I will be quite quick just to catch up with the time available. My name is Massimo La Rosa. I'm working for the European Commission, the humanitarian part of the Commission, DG ECHO, and I'm a policy advisor on forced displacement, migration, and social protection.
And my name is Camilla Hagström, also from the European Commission, but from the other side of the house. I'm from the Development Department. I'm also from a slightly different area of work. I work on migration. So this is going to be very exciting for me.
And then we have the pleasure to have here the representative of the Ministry of Family, Social Policy General Director of an Assistant of Turkey, Mr. Özdag. Thank you very much. He's the Deputy Director General. And we have Jonathan Campbell, the Deputy Director of WFP in Turkey. And Dr. Francesca Bastagli, the Head of Social Protection and Social Policy of the ODI. So I would like to ask Camilla to give us a brief introduction, and then we will start with the presentation.
Okay, so good morning, everybody. Indeed, in this session, we are going to discuss the challenges and the opportunities for extending the social protection provisions to displaced persons. Now, before I'll give the floor to our distinguished panelists, I just wanted to perhaps give a few thoughts from my perspective, working in the area of migration per se. As I said, no one is surprised that migration is at the top of the political agenda of the European Union, but also at international level. Everybody will know that we are currently at UN level negotiating the two compacts, one compact on migration and one on refugees. And I think, therefore, this conference that we're having for these 2 days is very timely and very important. Now, migration, of course, is not a new area of work for the European Union, not under the development policy and cooperation either. It's something that we have been engaged in for a long time. However, what has made a change, of course, is the new Sustainable Development Agenda, the SDG agenda, which for the first time includes migration as one of the considerations, and let's say in a positive way, that we also actually have to recognize the positive impacts of migration, while we obviously know about the challenges that are entailed in this area. I said it's high on the political agenda of the EU. That means that we are also under a lot of pressure, a lot of expectations to address the challenges and the opportunities that we are seeing globally and in Europe at this time. But we need to deliver the right responses. And I think in such a complex area of work, it's clear that we cannot continue to work in our silo approaches that we may have done in the past. We need to address migration in a multi-dimensional framework, and we need, therefore, to have cross-sectorial responses. You have discussed the humanitarian development nexus. It's one of the nexuses that we are probably going to touch upon today, and you did it yesterday. This is a core area of our work when we deal with migration and forced displacement. But I think it's not the only nexus that we have to consider. There are many other relations, interlinkages with different sectors that we also have to take into account. And I think, therefore, the role of social protection in the relationship with humanitarian, with development, and with migration policy is potentially a very important and powerful area. Now, last year we have adopted a new policy approach we do this all the time, but last year was quite unique because we, since last year, have a new approach towards forced displacement at the European Commission. We are extremely engaged and fully committed to roll out this new approach that we are encouraging. And of course, the inclusion and expansion of access to social protection is at the core, and it goes hand in hand with this new approach. I think I will not continue very much longer, just to underline the complexities and the interlinkages, the different nexuses that we have to take into account are key for this work. There are still a lot of answers needed. We don't have the right tools or the full understanding of how all of these nexuses interlink with each other. I think this is a very good reason for us to meet in this session today, and I am sure that our panelists and our audience will also provide us with good examples, experiences, recommendations, and perhaps give us some of these answers for how we can ensure that we provide the right responses to forced displacement situations and the linkages to social protection. So I will stop there, and I'll give the floor back to my co-chair.
Thank you very much. So what we will have now, we will have two presentations, first from the representative of Ministry of Government of Turkey, and then Jonathan from WFP. It will be mainly focused on the case of Turkey, and soon after, Francesca will help us to hold the talk and to link the case of Turkey to a wider discussion in general in terms of forced displacement and migration. So the floor is yours, Mr. Hostak, please.
Teşekkür ediyorum. Sayın Başkan.
Thank you very much, dear Chairman, dear panelists, and all the representatives of the conference. It's a pleasure to be here for me. Today, what I'm going to go through, it's about the assistance to foreigners, the social protection system that we use in our country, and before it, the social protection system in Turkey. I would like to highlight a few issues there. In Turkey, we can divide them under three headings. One of them is the social assistance system, and the other one is the social security system, and the third one is social services system. Social security system is the social insurance institution and the Turkish Employment Agency. The Turkish employment agencies, they bring together those unemployed with the employers. And social security or social insurance institution, they deduct premiums from the employers and from the employees who has a good level of income. And through these premiums deducted, they ensure the social insurance and social security. And also for the pension system, for those people to maintain their lives after their retirement, they pay regular pensions to the people. And for the social services system, we have Ministry of Health, Ministry of National Education, and Ministry of Family and Social Policies. The main goal of the Ministry of Family and Social Policies is to provide psychosocial services for the fragile, vulnerable people, and also to take preventive measures. And there are low care houses for children, and also female shelters for women, and also shelters for elderly people. Ministry of Health, they provide health services, medical care services. It's a paid services. However, for the vulnerable people, the health premiums of those vulnerable people, as the government pays all these premiums to the social security institution, the treatment costs of those vulnerable people are transferred to the Ministry of Health, and they have the possibility to get free of charge healthcare services. and also the foreigners, mainly Syrians and other foreign nationals, they can also benefit free of charge healthcare services. And the presidency, disaster management presidency, they also deal with all these services. And also Ministry of National Education, they coordinate the schools, and the schools are available both for Turkish nationals and other foreign national children free of charge. And now will present you the other slide. I will tell you about the organization of social assistance. In our country, we have three arguments in our country, in Turkey. The first one is Ministry of Family and Social Policies. The other one is Fund Board. We have a Social Assistance and Solidarity Fund. It is out of the general budget, and the management of it is performed by the Fund Board. This is a central organization. They collect the money, and through a central payment, the people are paid. And under the third argument, social assistance and solidarity foundations, the payments are done through these foundations. More than from the general budget, those people who are disabled and the relatives of the disabled people and elderly people, they are paid like central assistance. And also for the poor people, they are paid through premiums from the social insurance institution and from another fund out of the general budget. There are transfers of funds to the social assistance and solidarity foundations, and the payments are done through these social assistance and solidarity foundations. And the foundation's budget is almost 6.5 billion, and the general budget is about 1 billion. I'm going to tell you about how this social protection system works, both for Syrians, Turkish people, and other foreigners. How is the system? How does the system work? We have an integrated social assistance system. This is an automated one, and it runs based on the ID numbers. From the time of the application till the phase of payment, everything is dealt through the integrated system, and the data is exchanged among 22 organizations. They are helping each other indeed, and their accounting operations are run through this system. And also, if they are going to make any announcements, those social assistance and solidarity foundations are all around Turkey, located all around Turkey, and we have almost 1,000 social assistance and solidarity foundations. And if they are going to make any announcements through the system, it's possible to make the announcement and to inform all these SASFs simultaneously through the system. We have tax, vehicle information, title deed information, and all these civil registry information under this system. How we deliver social assistance in our country? The person comes among one of these SASFs, depending where they are located. They submit their ID and they request social assistance based on only their ID. We do not request any other document. With the ID, SASF officer, they receive the application and they enter the data onto the system that I was mentioning to you. All the assets, properties of that applicant can be seen. And then they can also hold a household visit to the address of the applicant. And then we have a board of trustees. Not a single person make the decision. Half of those people are selected, half of them are the appointed members. They cover some NGO members, some other members. The person could be found eligible or ineligible. If found eligible, through the system, an SMS is sent to that applicant, and so amount has been uploaded onto your account. We work with PTT. Please visit the closest PTT branch and receive your assistance. The person visits PTT. They need to show their ID and then they can get the assistance. And person is submitted a PTT card. The person, the individual, can either withdraw the assistance through PTT machines, or they can pay through that card on POS machines, point of sales. It is also possible to deliver their cards at home for those people who are unable to come to the PTT offices. And all these correspondences, bank instructions, and the accounting, they are all run through this system. And once the money is released to the SASFs, the officer can just reach it, and all the accounting transactions can be also dealt through this system. It is also possible for us to do impact analysis, to analyze all these data for the applicants and for the beneficiaries, and they are all kept safely under the system. And if we are going to start a new assistance, it is possible for us to extract all the information from the system, to analyze it, how many people can benefit from the assistance, how much we can increase the budget more. It is possible for us to run the impact analysis. Periodically, we can extract the data, and we can also produce more policies relating to the card distribution. And in this slide, you can see the Syrians, especially, they are highly concentrated on the southeast of Turkey by entering from Iraq and Syria. And you can see a kind of migration map. You can also observe them on the Aegean region. And under the ESSN, Emergency Social Safety Net Program, we have helped 3,657,000 Syrian refugees in Turkey. Excuse me. The slides are mixed. There are criteria for the ESSN. I'm not going to take too much time. You can just get the slides, and they are very much clear there. And in the forthcoming slide, Emergency Social Safety Net, how it is run through the system. It's for the Syrians. On the left-hand side, the Syrians, they apply, and 1,000 SASFs, they receive the applications. And under the Emergency Social Safety Net, we have 18 service centers where there are highly populated areas. To increase where the SASFs are lacking capacity, they are supported through the service centers. They also receive the applications, and they have been entered onto the system. And those people who are meeting the criteria, they are found eligible. Those ones who are not meeting the criteria, they are found ineligible. For the household visits, if we were to complete all these household visits before, it was not going to be possible for us to deliver the assistance immediately. Again, the Board of Trustees, they take their decisions, we create the eligible, ineligible lists, and then with our stakeholders, one of them is Turkish Red Crescent, and through World Bank and ECHO, they provide the funds, and the money is transferred to Halk Bank. From Halk Bank, the beneficiaries are uploaded with the necessary amount. And it is possible to use the debit cards both on ATMs and also on point of sales. And For this social assistance, you can see the diagram here. The household size is almost 5.9. Again here, with the EU funding by ECHO funds, we have a new program. It's called Conditional Cash Transfer for Education. The main objective of this program is for the children to attend school regularly. We have started a program like this. It's an assistance program as well. They can apply only with their IDs, and all the information they are extracted from the Ministry of National Education. Therefore, those children who are attending school regularly, those who are attending regularly 80% when the schools are open, we are providing them assistance. For the boys, it is 35. For the girls, it's 40 TL, primary school children. And for secondary school, for boys, it is 50 liras. For the girls, it's 60 liras. How about my time? Can I continue? And the other slide. Here, the opportunities and the challenges about those programs run for the Syrians. We have a very powerful information system. I was mentioning to you about the integrated information system. It's accountable and it can register from 5 different resources. And we have 1,000 social assistance and solidarity foundations. These are our strengths. And it's also possible to expand the system very quickly and to shrink it very quickly as well. We have never ever shrinked it, but in case of any need, we can also shrink the system. It is possible to revise the criteria. It's not taking 1 week or more than 10 days to do those revisions about the criteria. And the system is very much applicable for the shocks, for the emergencies. And this makes things easier for us. And for the challenges, the biggest challenge for us is the staffing, physical infrastructure. We had some challenges about it for those immediate influx, because there were millions of people passing through the border, and to register all these people, we had difficulty about it. It was a big trouble for us because there was also language barrier, because those people were speaking in Arabic, and we do not have many people who are speaking Arabic. And the Syrians, they had some different habits. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It has been, I think, extremely important to have your direct experience and to share it with us. We went through the overview of the social protection system in Turkey. We found some practical example on social assistance, security and services, social services, the mechanics on some of the areas in which how it's working now in terms of registration, delivery systems have been discussed, and then the 2 large programs now that are also co-funded by the international donors are being discussed, the emergency social safety net and the conditional cash transfer for education. It's now time for Jonathan. Please, can you help us to see what is the role of WFP?
Thank you very much. As you can see, working in Turkey against the background of the very comprehensive and sophisticated nationwide social welfare system that Ramazan has just described, it makes a very different context for implementing a humanitarian program. And so we've worked on developing the ESSN. Do you know which one? My role is to try and describe a little bit more of the linkage with the humanitarian programming. First, I think this is a very innovative program, and it's very much one that embodies the grand bargain reached at the World Humanitarian Summit in Istanbul last year. It's, as we saw, totally linked to the national social protection systems, but it integrates humanitarian safeguards, and that's obviously a key role for WFP. It's funded by ECHO, but the partnerships for implementation are all national partnerships. We implement in partnership with Turkish Red Crescent, or Kizilay. We work totally with the Ministry of Family, who does all the selection and the targeting. And we work with several other organizations. Ramazan Bey mentioned AFAD, the Disaster Management Unit of the Prime Minister's Office. But to be eligible for inclusion in the program, you have to be registered with the DGMM, the Migration Management, who is supported by UNHCR. And you also have to be registered in the civil registration for your address. So basically, with the exception of WFP and ECHO for the funding, all the stakeholders are national. It's multi-purpose cash, it's regular, it's predictable, it's unrestricted, so it promotes all the benefits that we were hearing yesterday. And it also creates other opportunities for delivering aid, and we heard from Ramazan the linkage with UNICEF and the CCTE. But it's also cost efficient. It's reducing the costs of what we're actually doing. It's driving innovation, and obviously it's linking well beyond the humanitarian assistance. If we look at the timeline, and this is the timeline after the initial negotiations, it scaled up very, very quickly. We actually launched it in September. We did a pilot in 3 different parts of Turkey in October. We went nationwide on the 28th of November. That's when we started taking applications. And in August, we reached 1 million beneficiaries. 1 million beneficiaries who meet the eligibility criteria, who've been through the process that Ramazan already described. Those 1 million applicants were reached, or were all selected by August, and they'll be receiving their payment just about now. I think this rapid scale-up has only been made possible because of the very, very strong structure that was actually there. Remember that Turkey is twice the size of Germany, 3 times the size of the UK. So we need those 1,000 SASFs to be able to reach people. One of the key roles, I think, of WFP is bringing in and ensuring a governance that meets the humanitarian requirements as well as the governance that Ramazan described under the national systems. And the governance we're doing here is a little bit different. Somebody once described this program as doing a humanitarian response through a development modality. And it is a little bit like that. So overall, we have this governing board. It's the high-level decision-making body. It's chaired by ECHO and AFAD, who's the Turkish Disaster Relief Agency in the Prime Minister's office. And it's chaired at that high level because it gives the seniority and the decision-making capability. All the rest of us, including the ministry, Kizilay, WFP, were members of it. We manage the program very differently. We have a joint management cell where WFP and the Turkish Red Crescent are actually co-located, and our staff sit thematically. So the monitoring staff of WFP and of TRC sit together. I think this creates not only a team spirit, but certainly ensures the communication and builds the efficiency. We are also working to the normal standards, I hope, of quality and accountability. We've done a lot of work on the targeting, modeling the targeting with the World Bank, actually shows that we are prioritizing the poorer households for assistance. We have a relatively small inclusion error, but we do have an exclusion error of about 9%. Already pretty good by humanitarian standards, but now we're working together to try and work out how we can reduce that, working with the SASFs in the field. We did a lot of assessment and modeling on the transfer value. It's not as high as we wanted. We would have liked it to have been higher, but it's still meaningful and it makes a difference. Again, working with the World Bank, this impact simulation shows that assistance is expected to eliminate extreme poverty among the beneficiaries. And at the moment, the transfer amount covers around half of what extremely poor households are spending every month. We've done a lot of work on accountability to affected populations, AAP, as WFP calls it. We have all sorts of communication methods, but basically what this does ensure is that we have two-way communication between the beneficiaries and the program. Kizilay Turkish Red Crescent runs a call center which has 23 operators at the moment who speak 6 different languages for the refugees. When I last checked, we had almost 350,000 calls that we received, and the average waiting time is only 2 minutes, much better than most of the helplines that we call. The Facebook page has over 53,000 followers. The average response time to respond to a query is 1 hour, and so far we've dealt with 99% of the queries that have come in. Again, I think very effective and very much appreciated by the beneficiaries who like Facebook as one of their communication mechanisms. We also have a website that has over 20,000 followers. We use all this feedback to actually improve the program mechanisms. For accountability, obviously this is one of WFP's key roles, is ensuring that we meet the accountability requirements of the donors. We have a very strong M&E approach, monitoring and evaluation. We basically monitor all aspects of the program, including the process monitoring, the post-distribution monitoring, beneficiary verification. We do financial reconciliations, and we were hearing yesterday about an OPM report. We're also working with OPM to do an independent evaluation of the program. The government actually calls this program the Social Cohesion Program, and obviously it's a very strong key aspect of the ESSN. It relieves a lot of the pressure on the national systems, and it relieves a lot of pressure on the local communities. I think one of the, or probably the unsung heroes of the Syria response are the populations in the host countries who've opened their doors to the refugees, who've been incredibly generous, who've written off a lot of back rental arrears. And now with the families actually having a better income, there's less dependency on those local populations. And particularly in Turkey, with the map that Ramazan showed you, this means the populations in the south of the country and Istanbul. Because the system is implemented through national systems, the Turkish population understand it. And they understand that it mirrors the assistance that they can have. And they also agree, as you can see from the figures above, that people are actually, they should be assisted. And one of the key messages that came from the social cohesion study that we're doing is that the Turkish people believe it's a responsibility of both the government and the international community to look after the refugees. And that's exactly what this project is, both the government and the international community. I think that the program has really been made possible by implementing through strong national systems, with strong national partners, with strong donor commitment that has actually given us maybe a better sightline than many projects have. It's thanks to the incredible generosity of both the government and the people of Turkey, And I think there's a lot of lessons in what's gone on in Turkey that could be replicated in other countries, including in Europe. Thanks.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you very much. I think before starting with Francesca, I just would like to recap on a few key words, and I think it's very important what I think Jonathan mentioned on the strong collaboration between the international community and the government. The new way of working between the humanitarian development, I think, in Turkey is a practical example, and the social cohesion as well, as opposite of social tension that it could happen in a specific crisis. Please, Francesca, would you like to help us to go through your presentation?
Well, so thank you very much for inviting me to join the panel and for the two presentations on Turkey. Absolutely fascinating, and congratulations on this very, very important work. Very pleased to learn and hear about it. So I've been asked to input as a researcher into this conversation. My background is research in social protection and wider social policy. So what I'm going to do is to briefly highlight some points that emerge from some of the ongoing analysis and work on issues that at least partly relate to some of the things we've been talking about. Before I do, just very briefly, I do want to go back to questions about the objectives and principles that underpin social protection and humanitarian action, partly because I think that some of the fundamental queries that emerge from not just the presentations here, but some of the issues we've been talking about over the past 2 days can be traced back to where these two overlap but also differ. And I do want to emphasize that social protection has poverty relief and assistance of vulnerable and marginalized groups as one of its objectives, but of course it pursues other objectives as well. And these include risk pooling, but also income or consumption smoothing over the course of people's lifetimes, and redistribution, vertical and horizontal redistribution. And the recognition and acknowledgement of these objectives matter hugely and have implications for the policy options that we discuss in terms of extending social protection to displaced persons. It links to questions around the length of displacement, around, of course, the legal status of the person, and particularly I'm thinking of international movement, so forced displaced peoples that are in a host country, and plans around repatriation, around resettlement or integration. And this in turn has implications for how we think through the financing and sustainability of their inclusion in social protection systems that may involve inclusion into a safety net or social assistance type intervention along the lines the one we've heard about just now, but could also contemplate or mean other forms of integration into social protection. And as we've said, the example we've heard about just now primarily focuses on one of the ways, and I think it's been done in an exemplary fashion, one of the ways in which humanitarian support and action can link with social protection, which is very much around the administration and delivery of a cash transfer to refugees. But of course, there are other elements of integrating refugees in social protection systems that can be thought through. But moving on just to the areas of existing analysis and research and how they can be linked to some of the issues we're thinking about here. One of the broad themes that on which a lot of work has been done in the past years is around shock-sensitive or shock-responsive social protection policies and systems. Now here the work primarily looks at how do we design and implement policy that ensures that systems or specific programs are flexible, adaptive, will provide timely and adequate response in the event of a shock. As was mentioned, I believe also yesterday, the focus of much of this work has been on shocks of either economic, financial nature, or shocks linked to climate-related and extreme weather events. There is scope to do more work around how this extending this to the context of expanding social protection and adjusting social protection in the case of crises like the ones we're talking about here. However, I think that some of the findings that emerge from this existing body of work can already yield important lessons for extending social protection in these contexts. And I'm thinking particularly about what we know about the features of a targeting system, for instance, that will facilitate scale up or other forms of adjustments in the event of a crisis, but also options for including contingency financing and other financing mechanisms, again, that can facilitate scale up when it's required. And the use of information from a variety of sources that can, again, greatly help to accelerate response in an effective manner. One of the core findings that comes out of all of the work, I mean, this is a consistent message, and again, this has been said, but we'll repeat it again, is that having systems or elements of systems and programs in place in advance of a crisis makes all the difference. And we just heard an example of how, I mean, Jonathan mentioned how absolutely critical it was in this particular case that there was a program and a system in place that could be used to scale up or introduce and scale up a cash transfer in comparatively comparatively tight time frame. Obviously, we know that in practice, we commonly set up programs and schemes in the event of a shock, and I think we need to continue to do that if that's the case. And there are plenty of examples of how of programs that were set up in the context of a crisis that then evolved over time and became part of permanent social protection. So again, we need to look at the beneficial developments linked to crisis response in the event of a crisis as well. A second area where there is, again, a strong research base and activity happening is around extending social protection to migrant workers. And I know that migrant workers can be considered a separate category or a subcategory, and need to be discussed perhaps in separation from the cases of forced displacement. However, again, if we look at the literature and the issues that are tackled there around the barriers to participation and take-up and what we can do to tackle them, some of these have, I think, direct relevance to some of the issues that our colleague from the ministry in Turkey has raised in the context of this humanitarian intervention. So issues around the legal and regulatory framework that can facilitate access to social protection, challenges around identification and the use of technology to help identify and integrate migrant workers, the question of information, knowledge exchange and language, but also, of course, of affordability and portability, particularly when it comes to social insurance schemes. These are all issues that have been examined very closely and that can yield important lessons. A third area concerns impact evaluation and the evidence based on the impact of social protection on well-being outcomes of individuals and households. And here there's a wealth of evidence looking at the impact of a whole range of social protection schemes, both on national populations, but increasingly also at refugees and forced displaced persons that are recipients of some form of support. The evidence base is generally very favorable and shows sometimes very important, powerful impacts of social protection on a whole host of outcomes, including sort of classic monetary poverty measures, but also access and use of education and health services. And importantly, also we find important impacts on a whole range of what are less quantifiable outcomes around that capture empowerment, or yesterday people mentioned dignity. So we know that these are programs and policies that can have a very, very important effect on people's circumstances. We also know about the potential for social protection to promote social cohesion, and again, we just heard a wonderful example of where this is happening in practice. From a sort of political economy side as well, what we find is the potential of a sort of virtuous cycle, particularly when social protection is linked to national domestic financing, so via taxation and contributory financing, the potential for social protection, social policy to promote mechanisms of accountability, of improved service delivery, of improved willingness to pay taxes, and the potential for this to stimulate and strengthen the social contract and relations between citizens and the state. So these are the potential impacts, and there is evidence of this. We also find in the studies that there can be unintended effects of social protection, and I think as a researcher, this is something we pay particular attention to, and we do need to be careful about monitoring and identifying and understanding effects that could offset progress in the direction that we're aiming for, whether it's in terms of poverty reduction or in terms of integration even, and enhanced cohesion. And I'll give just two examples. I mean, one of the obvious questions particularly when we talk about cash transfers and targeted cash transfers, is whether the targeting mechanism causes particular incentive effects. And one of the classic concerns is a disincentive to work effect. So things that have emerged from what I've read in some countries, for instance, where the requirements are that a refugee not hold a work permit or is not working in order to be eligible for the cash transfer. This could lead to refugees hesitating or to taking up work or looking for work opportunities for fear of losing their benefit. And even where there isn't this requirement, we know of circumstances where refugees are under the perception that they may lose the entitlement to a cash transfer if they take up work. Now, these are not issues that are specific to the case of displaced populations. These are issues that are, that we look at in any social protection program where there's a targeting element. But it's something we need to look out for. And in terms of social cohesion, of course, and integration objectives, there's the question of fairness and equity in how we design these programs. Yes, social protection can promote social cohesion. It can also exacerbate tensions or resentment where there are differential treatments that, for instance, between the refugee and host population that are not justified on a sort of equity or fairness grounds. So I think there too there's work to be done around ensuring that these principles are considered. Just before I wrap up, another area in which there's a strong research, body of research is around the implications of immigration for labor markets and social protection. And this brings us to the link between social protection and jobs and integrating displaced populations into the labor market, which we of course haven't touched upon here, but is a topic that is sort of present to some extent over the course of these days. The work carried out will focus on what are the labor market opportunities for, and also what are the risks of discrimination against migrant workers. A big question is whether migration is a burden to public finances. There are concerns about this, and again, studies that find a range of results. I haven't seen a systematic review that synthesizes the results, although for some countries the evidence suggests that actually migrant households tend to contribute to the system, to the fiscal system, more than what they actually take out. So it tends to emphasize the benefits of immigration to host countries and host communities. This strand of the literature also points to the importance of complementing social protection with broader and wider policies around stimulating employment opportunities and labor market integration. Just to wrap up, this is to say from a researcher's perspective, there is scope and opportunity to monitor the processes that we've heard about, and Jonathan has already illustrated how this is happening in the case that we just heard about. This is absolutely critical to make sure that we identify where there are challenges along the way, where there are processes of exclusion, that these be identified, and that policy or initiatives be, that they are redesigned or adjusted in order to minimize these sort of risks. There's scope to analyze institutional arrangements and options for strengthening these efforts to link humanitarian and social protection coordination and alignment efforts. And finally, there's an important role to be played around simply generating evidence to support effective and sustainable development of social protection, including its extension to displaced persons. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Francesca, also for giving us this more holistic and taking, let's say, bird's eye view and hearing about what we still need to understand, the research part, the evidence that we are still struggling to get right. Now, before we open the floor to our audience, I would like to take advantage of having you here on our panel, Mr. Özdag, and I would like to ask you a question, and the question is the following. So, in your view, what are the possible effects of social protection systems and social cohesion versus social tension in and between the displaced people and the host communities? So if you could perhaps elaborate a little bit from your experience.
Aslında bu
I think we need to look at this issue from two different
yerinden edilmişlerle ilgili sempozyumun konferansın ilk günü zannedersem
for displaced persons. I believe it was the second session. Miss Judith told us about our story from coming from Rwanda to Belgium, and it was a very moving story. And she felt like she was alive again when she had a home to live, and she was able to communicate with her friends. And actually, she was given some cash as a support, and she finally found employment as well. And in this story, we can see the importance of adaptation for these people in their new society, in their new lives. And on behalf of the host society, we need to take into consideration the percentage that are already beneficiaries of the social support systems. And tension can be expected from these groups. We have actually opened 17 offices serving only the Syrians because we were faced by some tension from the Turkish people. They were saying these people came to Turkey and they are taking our support, our help that was supposed to be given to us. And this is all I have to say about the Turkish and Syrian situation.
Please. Please,
Yes.
if you can say your name. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Jean-Marie Garelli. I'm a deputy representative of UNHCR in Turkey, actually. First of all, thank you very much for those very interesting presentation. Just a small sort of comment/question, but being based in Turkey, of course, I was able to witness firsthand the very impressive work which has been done in establishing the system and in scaling up. As Mr. Ozdar mentioned, Turkey has a very comprehensive social protection system, and he defined very well the different components. And I think just want to maybe highlight a point on the importance in linking, and which is happening now, and how we can work together to make sure that it's even more happening, linking between the social assistance component, which is the cash transfer, and the other component of the social protection, such as access to social services, which is very important also from a protection point of view. And the second point I'd like to make, it's, as it was mentioned also, I mean, Turkey, one very important decision that Turkey has taken is that they have given the legal right to work to refugees in Turkey, in the country, which is a very remarkable achievement. I think it will be also important to highlight the importance of linkage between access to social assistance in the sort of this short term, access to social services, and linking also to employment and access to livelihood. So just more a comment, but also I think it's important we put our head together to focus also on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have a question here in the middle.
Yes, my name is David Majid. I'm advisor at the Ministry of Refugees in Afghanistan. Thank you, first of all, for the presentation remarks. It was very interesting. My question goes to Mr. Campbell and Mr. Ozdak. You have showed us assistance system to refugees, but it was only mentioned for Syrian refugees. Is it also valid for example, Iraqis, Afghans, etc.?
We can take maybe one more question if it's okay.
Tabii. Tüm yabancılar, yani uyguladığımız.
Yes, of course, it is not just the Syrians, it is for all foreigners, not just the Syrians. The support we get from ECHO covers them all.
Around 92% Syrian and 8% from other nationalities, of which the next biggest group is actually Afghan.
Thank you for the clarification.
Iraqi, and the next group is Afghan. Apologies.
Maybe we can take a couple of questions before, please.
Oui, bonjour. Je vais parler.
Well, good morning. I'm Mrs. Kone. I do manage the National Agency of Solidarity Economy in Mali. And I would like to make a comment which could be turned into a question, possibly. I would like to know more about the tensions which might be created between displaced populations and local populations. And I think that the situation we have in Mali might be quite identical to your situations. When displaced populations do arrive, I must say that local populations are a bit reluctant and are not always positive about these displaced populations. Of course, we know that sometimes do believe that these displaced populations might be a danger. But of course, policymakers and authorities do their very best with a view to find an accommodation for those displaced populations. And we have people who have already were already there, who have been there for a certain period of time, and they don't get anything. So it seems that a priority is given to those who arrive and not to those who were already there initially. That's the way it works, at least in my country.
Merci, Professor Manzambi.
Thank you very much, Professor Lazambi. I'm in charge of social protection systems in RDC. I have a question for the representative of Turkey, Mr. Ozdag. I think that boys and girls do get different amounts of money in terms of education. Could you maybe explain the reason why the amounts are different? Because for me it is a type of discrimination, given that the amount is different.
Okay, please.
Okay, merci.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm Baigere Beru. I'm the General Director of Planning Studies in Chad. And I do represent the Ministry of Economy and Development Planning. I think that the topic here is quite interesting because in Chad we do welcome a great deal of refugees, and it started more or less 10 years ago, people from Darfur or neighbouring countries. And we try to do our very best, of course, with a view to take care of those refugees. But we have problems with local populations. We have tensions with local populations. And I must say that in my country, in Chad, generally speaking, refugees do live in camps, but it's not part of our culture. We have some people who are immediately hosted by families. That's a different way to take care of those refugees. But we have some tensions, and those tensions are related to environmental issues, to the share of land, for example, and other related issues. So, very recently, we have made an attempt to create a safety net system, and we decided to consider those people as people who might bring a lot to the country, because they do come to our country with their knowledge, with their opportunities and possibilities, because people from Darfur have spent more or less 15 years in my country, and they are almost considered to be native populations. But given the mentalities, or given the mindset, given the fact that people don't want to live in camps, they want to become local people, they want to take part in the development of the country. And that's the kind of challenge we have to deal with. And we don't really have a good avenues, or we don't have a good idea of avenues to explore, and we depend on other countries. Maybe you have more ideas about a way to deal with these populations.
Evet, öncelikle hanımefendinin sorusunu...
First of all, I haven't told there is not any tension or conflicts. There are some minor conflicts indeed. And at the very end, I try to explain under the challenges, especially for the social assistance and under the social protection, those people who are benefiting from social assistance, there is a tendency not to accept them. There is not any measure about it taken by the government. It is about the social structure of the society, I believe. And also in the southeastern part of Turkey, almost all of these Syrians are Arabs, and we also have some relativity, some kinship in the southeastern part of Turkey between Syrians and Turkish nationals. It's not going to be very much fair to say there's not any conflict or any tension. This is about the potential of the country. There are also some Syrians who became criminals in Turkey. There is also there are also some extradition cases. And relating to the other question, why the girls are receiving more cash assistance comparing to boys, under our constitution, there's a positive discrimination for women, for female. And after discussing these issues with our stakeholders as well, especially for the undeveloped countries, just to encourage the girls more, because the schooling is very much weak for the girls. They are not being sent to the schools. That's one of the reasons. We really pay utmost attention for the schooling of the girls. That's the reason why there is such a discrimination, just to encourage and promote the girls to go to school, and our stakeholders, they welcome this. Can I get the third question again? The translation was not good enough to understand it.
From the chat.
Üçüncü soruyu.
Who asked the third question? There was a third question. Would it be possible to repeat your question, please? Would it be possible to repeat your question?
So it could be easier for Mr. Ostag to reply.
Sure.
Well, I think that we have a challenge here in front of us. We do welcome refugees, and when they come to my country, most of the time they are sent to families. But the fact of taking care of these refugees is a problem. And I would like to know how you do manage in your respective countries to manage the situation of those refugees. And I would like to know, on top of that, whether there are some possibilities and opportunities available for those who stay, because we do have people who have arrived in Chad a long time ago, and we would like to involve those people in the development of the country. And I would like to know whether you do have the same approach.
Jonathan, you will complement. Thank you.
Okay, I'll reply to that question. First, I think the situation in Turkey is a little bit different in that we don't have people going into families. They tend to live independently within their own family, but not in the context of a host family. There are people in the camps, and that's around 8% of the Syrian refugees in Turkey, and there are assistance mechanisms for those in the camps as well. For the non-Syrians, and 92% of the Syrians, they're living in the community, but they live in their own family units. For the people who are staying longer and integrating into regular life, as Ramazan Bey explained, there is a very comprehensive IT system in Turkey which allows them to track at the Ministry of Family, and they can see if people have got formal work permits, if they are starting to have formal employment, what their salaries are, whether they're paying their social contributions, at which moment they would become ineligible for assistance anyway, and then they would come off the assistance roster. If I could also just take the opportunity to reply to the comment from Mali. You were talking about the new arrivals and the people who were already there. Basically, this system works for both groups. It picks up the people who are already there. Some of the Afghans, for example, have been there for a long time. It also picks up the new arrivals as soon as they've done their prerequisite registrations with the registration authorities.
Okay, since we still have a few minutes left before we are going for coffee, I'd like to address another question to you, Francesca, if you don't mind. And the question is as follows: what preconditions need to be met before existing social protection provisions can be extended to refugees or IDPs? Thank you.
Thank you. So, well, we've heard how important it is to have programs or systems in place in advance of a crisis. And we've seen a specific case of how critical having the system in place is to scaling up a program in a timely fashion. So I suppose one of the key preconditions is, and this has important implications for how we plan our work, is to invest in building programs and systems in advance of a crisis in order to be prepared when a crisis hits. And this includes, I think, building targeting mechanisms. Like I said, we actually know quite a lot about the features of an adaptive and flexible system. So we know what a targeting system looks like, the sort of information sources and management systems we would want to be establishing, the technology we would want to leverage in order to ensure a smooth management and delivery of services and transfers. A second precondition or requirement, I think, is clarifying objectives, whether we're talking about sort of shorter-term temporary relief and the primary reliance on safety nets, or broader and more medium to long-term integration of displaced populations into the social protection system. We need to be clear about that as we discuss what provision we're talking about. I think the equity and fairness principle that I raised and that touches upon, that relates directly to the question of promoting social cohesion and ensuring that we don't aggravate or even trigger forms of tension and resentment across different population groups. I think that's absolutely critical, and that means that in the discussion or consideration of transfer levels of the target population, of means of delivery, that in all of this we take into account the entire population, the displaced groups, but of course also the local host communities. And the final, I think, precondition when we're talking about social protection is the need for a focus on mid to long-term planning. Again, we've said this extensively, and it's really encouraging to see how this is now creeping into humanitarian operations as well, because that's absolutely critical to doing real social protection that is sustainable also over time.
Thank you very much, Francesca. I think it's time probably to close for having a good coffee. It's the very last one. Then we need to close. Yes, please.
Merci, monsieur, pour la parole.
Thank you very much, Professor Manzambi. I do come from RDC, and I have a question, actually, which is meant for the person in charge of research in the panel. I.e., what about impact studies and surveys which are to be carried out in the field? Because I think that I would like to know at the level of the World Food Programme, if donors, if people who do go to visit countries, mainly in poor countries, because we do have a budget devoted to research, and I think that local researchers, local scientists should be involved in research, or in the research to be carried out in the field. So that's the first question I would like to raise. The second point has to do with the value of external surveys. I would like to know who are the researchers involved in those surveys, those which are likely to take in the field. And I would like to know whether donors to have internal surveys, etc. Because I've seen recently, if I'm not mistaken, in Canada, for example, I took part in an international forum which took place last week, and it was about child diet, and we have a series of universities involved in these surveys. And recently I sent some students to an international body, to an international organization, with a view to study the impact of this type of support on some specific groups of the population. And I would like to know whether it would be possible to have access to the data, because external researchers need sometimes to have access to the information. And thanks to the accessibility of information, these researchers would be in a position to better assess the impact of these activities in local organizations and local population. It seems that there was a kind of a series of data which seemed to be protected, and no access at all was granted to external researchers.
Sorry, the question is partly addressed actually to donors, but in terms of research is, yes, commonly carried out with in-country or local researchers and is done jointly. The value of external surveys and who is involved, there is a whole range of survey instruments and types of studies, and again, some will be commissioned by donors, others will be, it varies hugely from country to country and case to case, and what the objective of a study is. A survey might be set up specifically to monitor and assess the implementation impact of a specific intervention, or to do something much broader, but then that can be used to do just that. Anyways, just to say that there's a whole host of information sources, and that ideally we make use of what exists in order to answer the policy relevant questions we're interested in. But that absolutely, ideally, this work is done jointly with local researchers, and the data are made available for analysis. But I'll pass on to perhaps Jonathan.
Okay, for us, actually, this research and learning aspect is a condition of the grant from ECHO. It's essential, it's obligatory. For sharing data with external sources, Turkey has very, very strong data protection protocols. So we are not sharing as much data as maybe we would do in some other countries, because technically it's government data and there are controls. But in many of the countries where we work, yes, we make our data available for other researchers as well.
Thank you. I think it's time to close. I would like to say a big thank to all the panelists, to Mr. Rosdag, to Francesca, Camilla for co-chairing, and Jonathan, and all the participants that were here with us. Thank you very much. It's time to coffee, and we will come back at 11:30. Thanks.